My name's Giles Fraser. I'm supposed to be talking about how to write and pitch a successful op-ed. I just worked out in my head, I've been writing for The Guardian for 15 years now, which is writing columns for them. I mean, I've written for the Daily Mail and for the Socialist Worker. So I do, and pretty much everything in between. For the last however many years, probably 6 years, I have a weekly column in The Guardian. I have been leader writer for The Guardian, and leader writing is a particular interesting skill. And for a number of years, I was on the editorial board of The Guardian. And the editorial board, we had daily meetings in the morning to decide on The Guardian editorial line and what comment pieces were required to back up that editorial line. So quite fully involved in the paper, and I've done some broadcasting and that as well. But I think probably my favourite journalistic expression is writing columns. I started, I said 15 years ago, and it was entirely by chance. I was phoned up by Madeline Bunting, who then worked for The Guardian, and asked what I thought of. I mean, you'll know this because people in the church know these sorts of answers. But it was on, I think it was Good Friday. No, it was Maundy Thursday. I was walking across Southwark Bridge, and my phone goes, and Madeline Bunting says, "You don't know me, I just got your number from somewhere random. I'm just looking for a vicar to comment." And I was just a vicar that could comment. And there's a posh shop in Fulham, Chelsea, somewhere called Theo Fennell, and they make jewellery. And they're making these crosses out of rubies that were incredibly expensive. And she said, "What do you think about there being a cross that's this ornate and this expensive? Do you think that's a bit weird?" Or, so it was always a lazy comment. And I said that you've always got to think, I always wondered about people wearing crosses. You wouldn't wear an electric chair around your neck. You wouldn't wear an electric chair covered in rubies. It would be an extremely weird thing to do. Why do you wear an instrument of torture around your neck? And this is what I I thought it was very strange that the cross had become not something they were offended by, but a sort of club badge for Christians. Anyway, she thought this was, "Can you write this down, please? Can you write this as a comment piece?" And that's how I started writing. I had no interest in doing it, and I started. And then the truth of the matter is, the person who was the comment editor of The Guardian at the time was Seamus Milne, who is now Jeremy Corbyn's media advisor. And I think secretly, Seamus wanted to piss off Polly Toynbee. And so for the first, I don't know how many times that I wrote in The Guardian, I think he'd always put me next to Polly Toynbee, she's a prominent member of the National Secular Society, and I think my religion was designed to cheese her off. So, as I say, I've been writing for quite a while. One thing I think the main thing I've learned in the time there is that those people who are interested in writing per se are generally not very good at it. So it's not about the writing, it's about what you have to say. It's about what you believe and what you think. There are some people who think they are writers, but don't actually have anything to say. They're rubbish. If you think the skill is writing, and then you go and find things to believe in, then that's no good. You need to have, and I trust that people who come here probably do have things that they want to say and ways they want to change the world and all of that. And that's absolutely the most important thing. Have opinions and lots of opinions. It is a very strange business having more opinions in public than you have in private. That's my life. I'm much more diffident in public, in private than I am in public, and because you're paid not to be diffident, you're paid to have strong opinions, and that's what you have to do. And if you're worried about that, if you like to caveat and footnote your positions in such a way that defends you from attack, if that's what you're worried about, then I think it's not for you. You have to be vulnerable enough to say things, even when you know how you're going to be attacked for it, and be perfectly okay with that. There is no pain-free way of writing opinion columns, and they're supposed to be generative. That's really, I think, they're supposed to generate debate and interest and comment and so forth. They're not supposed to be the last word, they're supposed to be the first word and so forth. So it's the psychology of being a writer, I think, is one thing to avoid. The psychology of wanting to footnote in a terribly defensive way the things that you believe in, be very careful about that. It's often why academics are not always terribly good at doing it, because academics are usually too defensive about their positions. They want to footnote their positions, and that's obviously the right thing to do in academia, but it's not the right thing to do when you're writing comment pieces. I think the other thing that you really need to be aware of is if you do it regularly, it has to be something you live with all the time. You are constantly jackdawing, picking up bits and bobs from one place or the other, listening, thinking that will make a column, putting it in your pocket. When you pitch quickly, and you have to write quickly. This is the one thing that people get wrong. I'm talking about within hours of something happening. The fact that it happened, a few days ago is probably already too late, especially if you're new to and you want to break in. You want to be the early bird. You want to be there very, very quickly. You want to do what you say you're going to do, and you want to be able to write quickly. And I think you write. Often people write much better when they write quickly. That's something people are afraid to do. They usually overwork their pieces. But generally speaking, if I gave you 4 hours to write a piece in, and if I gave you 45 minutes to write a piece in, I reckon the 45 minutes is the better piece. I would think so. I think you should write from the heart, and I think that has but that's a particular style that I'm keener on. But there are many different ways of doing it. So look, that's just opening up the subject of ways to talk about how to do it and how to get it wrong. What I really want to know is what people want to know about how I do it, about what you want to know, and let's just start off the conversation.
Are you predominantly... Oh, sorry.
Yeah, wait for them. You can wait for the mic, everybody, and then...
Are you predominantly reactive or proactive in terms of your... Or is it a mixture?
Yeah, well, you need a hook. I mean, there'll always need to be a hook for what you say, so there needs to be something that you react to. And sometimes that reaction, so yesterday I was writing, so I've written a piece today for The Guardian. I was writing it yesterday because I knew I had a busy day today because I've been to Cambridge to interview someone this morning. So I wrote the piece this morning from 7 till 8, and then went to Cambridge. But yesterday I was writing a piece about something else entirely, and I'd pretty much written it, and then something new happened that I had to react to, and so I wrote another one. And so sometimes reactive is right, but I will always try and write something for the major religious festivals. Is that reactive? I don't know. So, but the news agenda, you've got to keep on top of the news agenda, really. And there's only very, very niche places where you can get away with doing stuff that's not related to the news agenda. But the hook, I mean, your hook can be quite, you can go sideways once you've established a decent hook into it.
Hello. Have you ever written anything that, as you say, you have to live with, but you've regretted? And what was it?
Oh, loads.
What's the worst thing?
Oh, loads and loads of things that I've written that I've regretted. I mean, that's just, that also is part of it. You might be wrong, You've got to be able to be okay with being wrong. Publicly wrong, shamefully wrong, stupidly wrong. My favourite getting it wrong column was actually in the Church Times and not in the Guardian. And that was when the Bishop of Peterborough, as is now, was made the Bishop of Peterborough, who was a very conservative evangelical, and came from a different part of the church to me, and I wrote a column about how I thought this was a terrible appointment, what a dreadful bloke he was, and he should never have been made Bishop of Peterborough. And then about 3 weeks later, we had a meeting at St Paul's Cathedral in which the dean, you could tell that the dean could hardly contain his mirth. And I didn't know what it was. He goes, and we've got the bishop's consecrations coming up. Giles, you're canon in residence, so you're in charge of these bishop's consecrations. You have to plan them. And they are the bishops of so, and the new Bishop of Peterborough. So I had to plan his consecration. So I went and met him. And very nice bloke. What a nice bloke. And we got on really well. And I had egg all over my face, and it was a stupid thing to write. And I wrote a column after that saying it was a stupid thing to write. But I don't think being wrong is something you should be terribly afraid of. Being boring is worse.
So how does your kind of Christian ethical framework inform what you do and what you don't? Because you could say, well, is that loving your neighbour whom you happen to not particularly like because of his church background or whatever?
Well,
how do you feel as though you do what you do in a distinctively different way because you're ordained, you're a priest, you're a Christian? Are there moments when that rubber hits the road?
It's really that's the really hard question, because the don't be boring thing is terribly important, and I can be a bit fiery and have a go at people. Look, I mean, in a way, one of the important things that I do, and this is for The Guardian, and particularly for The Guardian this is one of the aims of my column, is to show religion's cultured despisers, as Schleiermacher called them, that what you can actually do with religion. So I want to say, look what I can do with my tradition. I can do something with my tradition that you might not think that you can do. So there's always a sort of, there's always an underlying element of apologetics about my column in The Guardian, even when I'm being incredibly mean about people. You may not think that's possible, but and I think that people have in secular places, they have such highly developed bullshit detectors for religion gone wrong. You really have to sort of purge yourself of piety in order to write that way. Now, are there moral issues? Yeah, of course there are moral issues about that. And there are times when it feels very uncomfortable doing the two together. But if the question is, it's right for Christians to be in the public sphere, there would be nobody equivalent to me in the public sphere writing that prominent way as a priest and as a regular communist in, say, somewhere like America. When Americans have talked about that, I think this is impossible. This is an almost impossible thing to happen. So, if that's a good thing, then there are certain things that flow from it. You have to live in You have to be as wise as serpents and innocent as doves. And it's hard. It's really, really hard. And you definitely get things wrong. You definitely get things wrong.
You say that to have opinions in public, you need to have a certain toughness of hide. Yeah. Is this something you've developed? Is it a disposition you have naturally that you're not particularly sensitive to how people think of you? You don't care. As I'm just speaking as someone who is quite vulnerable and does care, but also has opinions.
Yeah.
And you said quite clearly, if that's you, you shouldn't be doing it. But is this something I can learn?
Good. It's a really good question. And now I'm going to be more honest with you than I was to start with. There's a layers of honesty here about how sensitive people are, I think. Strangely, I'm very sensitive to disagreement in the parish. So I'm actually I'm a bit of a worrier about disagreement in the parish. So one-on-one personal stuff, I find it really disagreeable. I think you need to, when you write something, you really need to have a strong sense of fuck it. When you press you know something's going to happen and you press the button anyway, okay? You really need to be able to have that very, very strong sense of this is what I'm going to do, and people will get angry with me, and it is what it is. It absolutely is what it is. And you've got to fly into that wind. Otherwise, what happens is you start writing with the critics in your head. And if you're writing with the critics in your head, you're ending up addressing them and getting terribly defensive. And they're probably not always the people you want to be doing that with. So you need to free yourself from that. And there are various different, ways in which you can do that. I don't ever read the stuff in the bottom of Comment is Free anymore. I do a little bit, but mostly I don't. Mostly because I could anticipate it and write it all myself. But there are times when you find that you're writing stuff. If you're writing against your own echo chamber, okay, that's really hard. So we all have echo chambers, and normally they're self-supporting echo chambers. This is particularly on social media, but a column also goes into social media as a part of social media. So I think when you're writing against your echo chamber, then there's, so I'm a Brexiter, but I'm a lefty. So I'm definitely writing against my own echo chamber there. That's quite hard when you do that. But, that's that button, which is, when you've got something on the screen, you think, oh dear, am I going to get in trouble for that? And if you say to yourself in your head, am I going to get in trouble for that? You must immediately say, fuck it, and then press the button. You really must. And that's a sort of, and in fact, that's a moral issue. That's another aspect of the moral issue for, we talked quite a lot, people have been talking quite a lot about truth in journalism. And truth in reporting is have you got the facts right? Truth in opinion pieces is have you been honest enough? And that is quite exposing, I think. I don't know if I've answered your question. Yes, you will be hurt. Yeah. Chardonnay is the answer.
You mentioned social media, and we live in an age of internet trolling now. Has writing columns become a dangerous trade? How do you deal with that? But also people who do what you do, who are perhaps more obvious targets, women, people of colour. How do you operate in that environment?
Well, I can't place myself in that, my friends who are women who write get massively trolled in pretty horrible ways. I think Christians get trolled, actually, quite a lot. I get constantly trolled by people who are just trying to wind me up. It's the air we breathe. It is the air we breathe. I mean, we have to learn now. We are insurgents in a culture that is hostile to us. And we have to learn the skills of insurgency. And they're not the same skills as we are the dominant culture, we write from the dominant culture, we are the rebels now. And we have to learn the skills of being rebels. Christianity and I think that, that's probably happened in my lifetime. I think people who are older than me can still remember a time when Christianity was the default culture in this country. It's no longer the default culture. It's an alternative. It's an alternative worldview to the one that. So we are, and this is actually quite a helpful thing for us. So we're writing against a prevailing worldview, and that always gives you something to write about. That will always give you something to write about, but it'll always make you vulnerable, to be laughed at, to be attacked. But I think that sort of ridicule is. I mean, there's gospel stuff about how you stand up to that sort of ridicule and in the face of that ridicule, and it's easy to run away. Sorry, what I won't try and pretend that I'm doing is every column I write is a subtle way of preaching the gospel. Sometimes I'm just writing a column, So, and sometimes it's just a half a sentence, which is trying to challenge a particular dominant view, a secular view of the world. But you have to win people over as well. I'm sorry. Your question is really about how emotionally you have to have your support systems. You have to know it's coming. I mean, I have a particular strange sort of pathology. I went to boarding. And this is the really open truth about my dealing with it. Is that I went to prep school when I went to boarding school when I was 7, and I went to a really brutal boarding school, and we were beaten all the time. And I actually think now there's nothing worse ever could happen to me. And my sort of I have that sort of what's the worst that could happen type of. There was an advert about what's the worst that could happen, isn't it? Was it? What was it? Dr. Pepper. It's a Dr. Pepper, exactly right. It was Dr. Pepper. What's the worst that could happen? And there is a slight Dr. Pepper attitude that I have about it. It comes from my background, but it's like, actually, if we believe everything is going to be all right, if we have there is a faith aspect to that fight. And I think it is a fight.
Have you ever been in a situation where you'd like to say something but daren't?
Not in The Guardian. On the BBC, a lot. Thought for the Day, a lot. Yes, I've never once. Do you know? I mean, this shows you how naive I was, and this is like so many moons ago. Is I remember writing. I remember writing something which was critical of the Archbishop of Canterbury, and I thought, oh, should I really do this? In terms of loyalty, and where do my loyalties lie? And I thought, what do I say? And I phoned up Lambeth Palace, and they didn't know who I was, and the press spokesman. I said, can I just speak to someone? I just got some sort of. And they were clearly completely uninterested in what I had to say. So I thought, all right, I'll do it. And now I look back, the phone call came to nothing. And now I look back and I thought, I'm so ashamed of myself that I picked up the phone to sort of like go, would it be all right if I'm a bit nasty to you? Which is sort of, I wanted someone to say, oh no, it's fine, you be nasty to me, it's okay. Well, that was never going to happen. That's ridiculous. So you just got to own... No, I've never in The Guardian have I been told, no, you can't write this, which is lovely. Many times many times in the BBC. Yeah. I'm trying to think of the worst. Yes, I can think of the worst. I'm not going to tell you.
Yeah, I was wondering, thinking of your Radio 4 thoughts for the day and being on the moral maze as well, you're interacting with, these different presenters and other voices and opinions, right-wing, non-believing. Do you have some interesting conversations with some of these people afterwards, and have you had any impact? Do they ever change their views? I'm just interested in some of that interaction you have with non-Christian, non-believers, however you want to put it.
Yeah.
People who think differently from you.
I'm not a sort of... I'm not an evangelical. So I don't have that directly proselytizing sort of instinct. Though I think my column, my intention behind it is broadly apologetics for Christianity. So, I personally think that people are increasingly allergic to those sorts of approaches, and we have to find other ways to speak about the gospel than, can I tell you about the Lord Jesus at lunch? I just don't. I think people have found that their ways, they're very, very defended against this sort of thing. And I think actually we have a task to just be seen as human beings with human concerns, actually. We've got so if the question is, have I succeeded in converting any high-profile, I think the answer to that is probably no. I know that's not the question, but no.
You're very forthright, passionate. So, John Humphreys, for example.
Humphreys. He's a definite non-believer. I've had some proper run-ins with Humphreys over his... Humphreys wrote a book about religion, and I sat around his kitchen table arguing with him passionately about it, many hours. But he ended up... in a sense, Humphreys might well be a sort of... He ended up calling himself a failed atheist. And he wrote a book, I think the book was called Confessions of a Failed Atheist. What is it called? In God We Doubt. What's the subtitle? I think it's Confessions of a Failed Atheist, yes, In God We Doubt. And there's a chapter in there which is stolen from me. That's, he was a sort of... the failed atheist was as much as... Maybe that is a sort of success. But what I want people to think is, what I want them to be surprised by is, lots of people think Christians are stupid. They just think we're stupid. They just think we can't think. They think we're emotionally sort of wet, and we're taken for granted, taken for a ride. And part of my sort of passionate, slightly aggressive acerbicness is that I don't really want to... I don't want to sort of feed the stereotype that we're all nice and stupid. And that's I think that's just a really damning quality that we often get pigeonholed as, and I just think it's really dangerous for us to be seen as that. And and for the Church of England, thank goodness there are people who are not from the Church of England, but the Church of England's particular pathology is that, for a long period of time, is that, niceness was almost okay. Niceness, pastoral care replaced theology as something that the church did, and the church wasn't. It hasn't been very good at doing theology for quite a few years, it seems to me. There are some great theologians, and there are some people who are doing theology and in the universities and all sorts of things. There are some great, there really, really are. But actually, the idea that that the clergy are scholars in the same way that rabbis are all seen to be scholars, we don't have that, and I think that's a pity, actually.
You've talked about how you're not trying to preach the gospel in your op-eds or writing, but is there any sense of a kind of prophetic calling that you have, or is there any spiritual practice that goes in, or prayer or conversations with God or anything that...
Well, I mean, there's definitely prophetic. I mean, isn't it funny, isn't it? So you can be a priest, and that's okay, but you can't call yourself a prophet. The prophet's an honorific, isn't it? And yet it was a sort of a calling it's a scriptural calling. Someone once, who is it? Somebody once? It may be Brueggemann, talks about, or it may even be Rowan once talked about what a prophet is, and there was a line, is that the prophet smells out death and points to it. And I think what the sort of like, the idea that there's something corrupt, that there's something wrong, that there's something about our society which is not working, that's something that's being ignored, that's something that, some great injustice that's happening. You know, I mean, so when I said I changed my column, I was writing a column yesterday. I was writing a sort of rather gentle column. I thought I'd written too many aggressive columns. And I was writing, so sometimes you need to do a bit light and shade. And I was going to write a column about my wife, who's Jewish and Israeli, telling me off for not having started the Christmas cake yet. She's bought all the nuts and figs and so forth. And I was going to do something about being in an interfaith house and how that works. And it was going to be a sort of rather gentle column. And as I was finishing this column off yesterday, a knock happened on the door. And there was a woman who stood there on the vicarage doorstep, and she goes, I was just about to go and rob Tesco's opposite, and I was so ashamed, I stopped and saw there was a church and came and found you. And we're in one of the rollout areas for universal credit. And she hasn't had any benefit since August, nothing. She's got 2 kids, no partner. She's had no benefits since August. I mean, you know, she said a friend said that they would lend her a tenner, but couldn't manage it in the end. That was her economics for the week. Now, I guess, you know, the sort of like, there is an absolute gospel imperative that goes, I just tear up the one I was writing and I just write about this. You know, because there's a voice, you know, they were talking about this in Parliament. They were talking about it in Parliament yesterday. And yet this was the voice that I felt absolutely I had to use my column to. Is that a sort of, do I feel at some sort of prophetic aspect? Well, it's an honorific. It's difficult to claim, but I do a bit. Yeah, I think that's the sort of thing I feel it's important to channel, and to use it to channel. And yes, it's absolutely to do with faith. Absolutely to do with faith.
So how does it work? Do you just have a decision about what you're going to write about, or do you have to pitch it every time?
No, I just write whatever I like.
And is it always like that every time?
Well, the only time... so you just got to make sure that other people aren't going to write about the same subject. So that's all you have to make sure, that you don't cross over. Now, part of the reason I moved to the day, I used to have a column on Saturday, and now my column Friday, and part of the reason was Johnny Friedland had his then, and Johnny often likes to write about Israel, and I like to write about Israel. So it was actually quite difficult, and we often found we were having, both of us wanted to write about the same thing. So I'm now on a day where people don't generally write about the same sort of things. I'm interested in it, and that's great. So I don't even ask. I just write it, and I send it in. So I have a sort of rhythm of the week. My column has to be in at the sub-editors at 12 o'clock on Thursday, 12 o'clock today. And my week is always has a rhythm which is always about that, what I think about and what I'm going to do this week. And you normally have to have 2 or 3 ideas, and you have to live with them. And sometimes on very odd occasions you get to Thursday morning and you wake up and your mind is a blank. That's really, really hard. Anybody can do the job a bit everybody's got 10 columns in their head. Really desperate to say it. But actually, you really earn your money when you're like, I don't know, I've got really nothing to say whatsoever. But I've got absolutely nothing whatsoever to say. But you've just got to write it. But I'm lucky in The Guardian that I don't have to pitch. I just write it straight into the paper. Which is really, I'm really lucky about that. I mean, when it comes to pitching, I think the key thing for pitching is speed of getting in there and really having something very distinctive. Some people write a little pitch, and the line, oftentimes they will be rejected because the line isn't distinctive enough. People are trying to do on the one hand and on the other. And on the one hand and on the other columns are generally not good. You let someone write on the other. You write on the one hand and leave it to someone else to do that. So you have a clarity of vision. And often people don't like doing that because obviously, things are usually more complicated, and there is lots of on the one hand and the other in real life, but you're shining a torch from a particular angle. You will always be open to the criticism. Yes, but what about? Well, of course, that's okay. That's okay. But if people feel uncomfortable with that, then the particular discipline of writing opinion columns may not be for you. May not be. I don't mean you particularly, but for anybody who does.
Hi. So, do you write your own titles, column titles?
Never.
Never. Okay. So I'm not going to ask you what.
Well,
how you
no,
choose
that's not true. Never. That's not true. Never. So I have so my sub-editor, a guy called Mike Carter, who I love dearly. I can send him, if I have a really difficult day, I can send him all sorts of stuff, and he knows what I like and what I don't like and what I'm sensitive to. By now, I've worked with him for so long. Mm-hmm. And he's a great mate and he's a great writer. So he does all of those things. And in The Guardian, I trust them. I mean, I really, really don't trust. Sometimes they can stitch you up. Sometimes they can stitch you up. Mm-hmm. One of my earliest memories of The Guardian is writing a piece about there'd been some tragedy and people had come to light candles. And I said something, in the work. I can't even remember the argument that I was making at the time, but it said something about the way in which the National Secular Society, I think it was, were remembering this was parasitic upon, and I use that as a sort of logical term, parasitic upon religious practice. So it was a sort of echo of religious practice, and they were sort of like lighting candles and things like that. And it was just making that point. The headline was Parasites on Religion. Okay. And I was just like, and I wrote to Seamus, and I said, Seamus, mate, this is fierce. This headline is fierce. And he wrote me back, and he said, have you read Letter of James in the New Testament? And I said, what? He goes, fierce, isn't it? And I was like, all right, okay, you win.
Yeah, it's partly because I was just also thinking, so I work for International Justice Mission here at an anti-slavery charity, and some of I would love us to do like more op-eds and stuff, but some of what we're dealing with is so sensitive, like because we're taking people like slave owners and traffickers to court and that kind of thing, that some of what we're doing is so nuanced in terms of sensitivity that if someone runs the article as we write it, totally fine. If a sub-editor takes out some bits they think are a bit boring but are actually strategically really and politically important for us are in there, otherwise we could get kicked out somewhere, then, like a country, or a sub-editor puts a title on something that is actually really damning of a country that we really need to not say something bad about.
Well, then it shouldn't be you that's writing it.
Okay.
So then it shouldn't be you that's writing it. Somebody should be writing it. Someone who should be writing that sort of thing, who doesn't mind being banned from the country, or it doesn't matter. So you've got too much to lose to write a column like that, which is why, quite rightly, you can't be a columnist. Mm-hmm. Now, what you have to do is you have to use other people. You have to have, legitimate deniability. That's what someone like me would be for, okay? So I would write a column blasting, the leadership in southern Sudan, okay, that you probably want to do anyway, but can't do because you've got operatives in southern Sudan. But you can't trust. Look, the newspaper's not an NGO, and don't try and get it to be one, because it's not. So you've got to work it in a different way.
I had a question about craft. So you have a lovely, lively writing style. It's very easy to read and very well paced, and the vocab's really varied. But does it just come straight out like that? Have you worked on it over the years? Are there things that you've tweaked along the way? How do you actually plan your writing as it goes?
Hemingway said the secret to great writing. It's just a genius thing to say in many levels. Hemingway said the secret to great writing is long sentence followed by a short sentence. I love that advice, by the way. I absolutely love it. So here's what there are some little tips. Short sentences, always better. Always write short sentences. People write way too long sentences, and they're punchier, and so the more I do it, the shorter the sentences I get. Write in a way that's you're not writing a sort of academic treatise. This is I can't emphasize enough about how this is different. You know, I've written academic stuff before, and there is a sort of pace to academic writing which you don't have. You need to, and I suppose also the NGO type of press release style, where everything feels rather sort of preciously has to be right. And I understand why, by the way. I'm not disparaging that one bit. But you can't do that. You have to shoot from the hip more. It has to be a little bit more chaotic. It has to be more emotional. It has to be more personal. It has to be slightly more irreverent. It has to be slightly more irresponsible. You know, you've got to be slightly worried about what's going to be said next, and you know, I think that flows into the style stuff. But I do emphasise what I said before. If you just become a style writer, I mean, Owen Jones, who writes The Guardian, says, "I hate writing. I'm not a writer, and I hate writing." I mean, he writes everywhere, okay? And you know, he says, I'm just like so angry about this, I feel it bubbles out of me, okay? And it just has to come. This is the way in which I do it. And I sort of think that's really important for people to have that feeling, that it's not about, I'm interested in the craft. You know, bugger the craft. If you've really got something to say, the craft will come, and it'll come from you. So you have to listen to your own rhythms of what you think. And there are, I write in a sort of semi-angry way because I'm a semi-angry bloke, you know. And people will write in a sensitive way if they're a sensitive person. There's different ways of writing. That's not, mine is just my particular way. But a lot of it is about listening to yourself. But I don't think it's a sort of vocab, semicolons type, you know. I don't think it's that sort of thing. It's a joy as well. It's a joyous thing. I've talked a lot about the hassle that you can get. It's joyous when you can make a difference and you can change something. It's joyous when someone writes to you and tells you that you've put something in a way that's they've never understood before, and that's sort of like, you know, open them up to seeing things differently. It's utterly joyous when people thank you for that, and I get lots of that too, which is really lovely. You have to be deaf to praise and criticism, though. You have to be deaf to both. They're both kryptonite. Praise is kryptonite. Criticism is kryptonite to your writing, because it sort of corrupts you. So you have to sort of like, if you end up being liked too much, or end up feeling you're in the pocket of a particular sort of view of the world, you sort of feel you have to kick about in it. You really, there's a responsibility to be irresponsible in those sorts of. Thank you very much indeed. It was like very, very nice to come and just talk.